Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Andrew Peters. It's a pleasure to be the facilitator for tonight. Waminjaka, welcome in Wurundjeri language. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I'm a Yarra Yarra Yorta Yorta man myself. Very proud of that. A lot of knowledge through my mum, late Auntie Dot Peters. I've worked at Swinburne for 20-something years and seen a lot of change over that time, which is really great. Also, a lot of battles we've still got to fight that I'm really excited about as well. We've got a wonderful panel tonight. We initially had this as part of Social Sciences Week, but when it got closer to Social Sciences Week, and I'm not teaching this semester, so my organisation's not, I was going to say not where it normally is, it probably is where it normally is. But we realised that we didn't want to rush it. We wanted to sort of get the right people involved, and I'm really rapt that we're able to do this tonight. So thanks very much for coming. As I said, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Woiwurrung, bless you, the Woiwurrung people that acknowledge elders past and present. It's a great pleasure to be able to do my job on Wurundjeri country, to have the strength of my ancestors and to be able to utilise that in everything that I do every day and see it coming out in the way that I teach, in what I'm learning, in the colleagues that I work with, in the connections I'm making in a range of different things, both work-wise and outside of that. It's really just a wonderful feeling. So it's really, really great to be part of this panel and particularly talking about this comment. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce everyone and talk a little about my connection to them. Then I'm going to get everyone to introduce themselves and talk about how they got here. But I'll finish with the acknowledgement, with permission from elders and community, by saying Wurundjeri Balawa Minjika Yimin Kundibik Ngungojandala Bagagung Bulok Nigalik. Wurundjeri people welcome us to the land today with thanks to our grandfathers, grandmothers, our elders. So obviously here we're talking about the referendum, the voice to Parliament and what it means. And I've been saying to a few people, as a lot of us have, that over the past couple of weeks, I'm getting a lot of messages from friends of mine that I went to school with, that some I haven't spoken to for 10 years or so, saying, I don't know what this is. Can you give me some advice? And we'll talk a little later about, some of us might talk about our personal perceptions on it and what we sort of think. But tonight's more about just getting some information around both sides of this referendum argument. We've got 3 Indigenous people and 2 non-Indigenous people here on the panel. So hopefully we get a good sort of cross-section of ideas. But as well, it's about information and where to go for information. And we'll talk about that soon as well. I'll just start. So as many of you will probably know, we've had 44 referenda in Australia's history, and only 8 have been what we'd call successful, so have been passed. The majority of them involve the actual operations of Parliament. And so in a sense, particularly more recently, we notice a sort of what you might call a healthy scepticism of government and how the Parliament runs, and that probably can be known as, or put down as, a reason why some of these referendum haven't been successful. In 5 of those cases, so for those that don't know, and hopefully most of you do, in a referendum, we need a double majority, which means the majority of the Australian population needs to vote in favour of it, and the majority of states. Now that's out of the 6 states. So the ACT and Northern Territory aren't counted in that, although their residents can vote in a referendum. There are 5 cases where there was a national majority, but the referendum was defeated, so there wasn't a state majority for that as well. So again, I won't go into my views just yet. I might cover that a little later, but there's a lot of angst in Aboriginal communities around that sort of thing as well, although there's a lot of optimism too, because we've actually got to a point where we're hearing about this referendum when we're discussing this referendum now. It's our first one in the era of social media, and the panellists will talk about that shortly too, and about the impact of that. And as I said before, for me, a lot of the impetus behind this and having a panel like this was the question that I'm getting from people, or comments that I just don't get it. Don't know what we're voting for. Unfortunately, from my view, I think we come up in a lot of cases where we have federal elections, state elections, and a lot of Australians just don't get it. But hopefully, this one is a little different. I think people are wanting to be a little bit more informed on the issues and what we're talking about. So yeah, hopefully we can contribute a little way to that. So I'll just go around quickly and introduce. We've got Matt Jacoby, as you can see from up here. Matt's now the Academic Director for Indigenous Learning and Teaching here at Swinburne. The reason I had to look at that is every couple of months I see Matt, his title seems to change. And we've got Adam Mooney, who's the Director of our National Centre for Reconciliation Practice here at Swinburne University. We've got Ian Ham, who's the Chair of Swinburne's Indigenous Governance Committee, and a wealth of experience in the Indigenous space, particularly in terms of politics and those sort of things. And the wonderful Keshi Moore, who's a student, law student from the Melbourne University. Keshi and I actually met on a plane a few months ago. Very fortuitous meeting with a range of different things going on around us. And about 6 weeks ago, I had an email from Keshi explaining what she's doing now, and I thought, well, this is a great opportunity for us to get together on something. So I'm going to introduce, I'm going to talk to each of them now, but as each of the panel members talks, they're just going to give you a little bit of their own background. As Indigenous people, especially when we're talking about Indigenous topics and concepts and ideas and topics, it's important for us to locate ourselves and tell our story so that the audience understands where we're coming from. In traditional times, and I don't like to use that word, but young people would have explained to them why they're learning something and who's teaching them. Elders would have a specific role to teach certain individuals. It wasn't just walking into a classroom and learning from a random person who just happens to be appointed your teacher on the day. So our stories today are really important from that point of view as well. And I think it's something that I'm really proud of here at Swinburne, that we see that more and more from our educators. So first up, I'm going to pass over to Adam. So Adam, yeah, if you can just give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll pump into the questions on the topic.
Thanks, Andrew. And I also acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as traditional owners on the land on which we're meeting today, and pay respects to elders past, present, emerging, and also for Aboriginal people that are in the room today. I want to say also thank you to Andrew for his and Andrew Gunston's massive leadership role in taking Swinburne to a position of elevate status as a Reconciliation Action Plan organisation, and passing the baton on now to Professor John Evans, who is my boss, and I'm very proud to work alongside. Coming to Swinburne it's a real pleasure. I'll go back to my probably my first significant role in reconciliation was that with Reconciliation Australia in Canberra, having worked there from 2008 to 2012 for 4 years as the very first director of the RAP program. I think I've said to Andrew and to John in the past that the chairs then, Mick Dodson, Tom Calmer, and a range of other people would never have dreamed that an organisation would be doing what Swinburne's doing when they first conceived this program. And so full credit to you, Andrew, to Andrew Gunston, and to Ian for governing all of this, as well as John. So I want to really say that. Very briefly, my role, I've only been here for a few months. I'm involved and very excited about developing the next Reconciliation Action Plan, an Elevate Reconciliation Action Plan for Swinburne University. The majority of my career has been in both the corporate world, working with Ansett for 7 years, with Merrill Lynch in London for 3 years, the investment bank, with ANZ for 13 years, and in the last 13 years, up until the beginning of this year, the not-for-profit sector with Aboriginal organisations and organisations particularly focused on financial inclusion, economic inclusion, particularly of women and Aboriginal people. So it wasn't always the way. There was a catalyst. The big turning point in my life, I think, was my wife, who works for Oxfam, while I was working at ANZ as the Chief Financial Officer of the biggest division at ANZ. When she said, I need to go to Cambodia to get grassroots experience in working on HIV/AIDS programs, I surprised and put up my hand and said, I'm coming along. And I took a career break from ANZ, and at the same time did a master's in international development, and my life changed dramatically, because what I saw in Cambodia, I had this blinding flash of a wake-up call that what I saw in Cambodia, the remnants of the impacts of colonisation were happening in my own country in Australia, but I was unconsciously unaware of that, and came back in 2005 to ANZ and worked in the corporate affairs area, and was offered a role to develop the very first corporate reconciliation action plan, that of ANZ. I say that story because this unconscious awareness, because I think that's where many Non-Indigenous Australians are still out. I'm non-Indigenous Australian. That's where many people are at. And I think that conversations that we're having now help illuminate our history in a positive way. And I'll say, I think this referendum, rain, hail or shine, whichever is the outcome, I believe there's a positive way forward for a yes and a no outcome. And I'll maybe talk about that later. But as I said, and I was about to say, I grew up in a community in East Keilor in the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne, and met Aboriginal people through sport mainly, became friends, playing with Essendon under 19s at the time, and found myself cut from the list at the same time. They were cut from the list, and we remained friends, and that was really my first significant connection, and this gradual learning throughout my life of the opportunities that I had that my friends didn't have was a stark reality that led to me coming into this work, I think.
Yep, thanks, Adam. So while we're on that, when your role as sort of the Centre for Reconciliation Practice, so we're looking at the concept of reconciliation, but how as a university we can put that into practice. In terms of this referendum, how do you see reconciliation being affected in a practical sense with a yes vote and also with a no vote? So,
Yeah.
Going either way,
Yep.
How do you see things changing from now?
That's a great question, and a lot of people are thinking about this now. So I think maybe 6 months ago, most people assumed or thought that the Yes campaign was going to be a shoo-in because it was so clear and so good. And we know that through a whole series of events and I think miscommunications and political opportunism that the no case is now in the lead. But I remain optimistic about a yes outcome, particularly in the last few days with the walks over the weekend and new advertising, multi-million-dollar advertising campaign starting to get up and running. The yes case for me is a genuine opportunity for Australians and everyone, of course, at Swinburne, students, prospective students, staff, and a range of others to feel much greater hope and belonging for the future about who we are as Australians and where we're going. I think it's a unifying opportunity, and this is a very, very simple and generous invitation from Aboriginal people through the Uluru Statement from the Heart for us to hear, for us all as Australians to hear that very I think modest aspiration to listen to what we're saying. And if you're making laws, as in the 1967 referendum that decided that the government had a responsibility to make laws in respect of Aboriginal people and to include Aboriginal people in the census, if that's going to happen, can you please hear what we're saying, hear what our aspirations are, and hear about the best and most efficient way locally, regionally and nationally to bring that about. So I think that's an unbelievably modest request and a very reasonable request. One of the things I wanted to point out is the similarities between the yes and the no. This is not something that's often talked about. Both cases say constitutional recognition is essential. Both the yes and the no say that a voice to Parliament is essential, albeit one through constitutional enshrinement and the other through legislation. Both, as recently as the weekend on Insiders, Warren Mundine said that treaty is important, truth-telling is important, and a voice is important, albeit a legislated voice. So we're really nitpicking at the differences between the yes and the no case. And so I just wanted to really share that and acknowledge that. In terms of a yes outcome, I think that will be very much a positive, unifying outcome for the country. Aboriginal people and progressive supporters of the yes case will feel not just emboldened, but recognised, heard, valued. I think is a really, really important part. And so for us, the impact at Swinburne is that we, under both yes and no, but especially yes, we are accelerating and deepening and broadening our work here. Under John's leadership, we're consulting widely right now with the council, with Academic Senate on Thursday last week, with our own Aboriginal and First Nations stakeholder group internally and externally on the next big ideas, and they're very, very practical. They're profound. Indigenous building co-fabrication centre at the Croydon campus is one idea of being able to substantially address the housing shortage that we have in Australia, particularly in remote communities, using innovative technologies and enabling community-led design and architecture, which is massively uplifting for me. That's just one of 4 or 5 great ideas that John and other people have had before I came along. So the yes, if there's a yes outcome on the 15th of October, we will continue to redouble our work as we're doing at Swinburne. Secondly, if there's a no outcome, I think that will just embolden us even further. I think that that the RAP community of 1,200 organisations around Australia that are firmly supporting the organisations themselves, the yes outcome, supportive of reconciliation, supportive of closing the gap in an informed way. I think it's so I'm not, what we're doing as a university in a practical sense is making sure that we support all of our First Nations staff and students to show the resolve that we have as an organisation to be able to go way beyond what probably was expected with our next reconciliation action plan. The other thing I really wanted to say, Andrew, before I pass the microphone over, is the importance of the voice in education, in tertiary education in particular. So I think I'm talking to everyone in the room here that knows that education, particularly tertiary education, is all about enabling people to develop the capability, all of us as individuals, to live full lives, however we define them ourselves. So that might be in terms of attaining livelihood, our sense of self in the world and our own worldview, as well as the way that we relate with other people. And so the voice is an essential ingredient essential element in meeting those aims, because what it does is it enables First Nations Australians to articulate an aspiration and a way to get there that is heard. It's efficient for government. Ian and I were just chatting on the way in here that there are some. It's not doom and gloom around the closing the gap targets. There's significant positive progress that's actually happening. For those that aren't aware, the life expectancy gap in the last 13 years has gone from 11 years to roughly 8 years. So good progress is being made. It's a mixed progress, but being able to have the voice of Aboriginal people informing the development of policy is absolutely essential. And so in terms of education, the other important aspiration for us as an institution and for all educational institutions is bringing more students into the system so that they can benefit from everything that tertiary organisations and education have to offer. And so international students want to come to a place where they feel belonging, where they know that there's a community that is connected, that is vibrant, that loves each other, that talks about how much we love each other, and is willing to do things in our sphere of influence to advance reconciliation. So I think, in summary, I think the voice is a very positive thing for education as a whole. It's a massively positive thing for Australia as a whole. And it also is the epitome, again, this is a sort of, for the group that's in the audience tonight, it's the epitome of best practice community development, community-led articulation of, here's my well-being, here's what I aspire to. Let's now apply the resources internally ourselves and other resources to be able to achieve that well-being. The Canadian government actually did that within some Inuit communities and other First Nations communities around 20 years ago, and it led within 10 years to a halving of the life expectancy gap and greater participation rates in education and other key elements. So we know it works. We're behind the 8 ball, but I think we're overall heading in the right direction.
So thanks, Adam. Just in closing that comprehensive analysis you've given us, if it is a no vote if the no vote gets up, you don't see that making too much difference to the way your role here, for example, in terms of reconciliation practice, will be affected?
I actually
Not.
think that it's a if there isn't it doesn't destroy anything. I think if in any way it emboldens us to there's a heightened amygdala in our brains right now to listen to and hear these contemporary issues around reconciliation. So I think that it's unfortunately, well, it's peaked in interest, not always with the right information that's available at the right time. But I think that it will enable us to talk very positively about both symbolic and practical reconciliation. So a lot of the debate is on the no side is around practical over symbolism and so on. But I think just having conversations and sharing, it's very important for us. I think to acknowledge a classic example of where the voice will be, if the voice was in existence right now, we wouldn't have one politician predominantly based in Canberra that happens to be from Central Australia saying that there's been no impact of colonisation on First Nations Australians. And today, this afternoon, the Central Land Council that actually is the elected representative body of First Nations people of the same area that this particular politician represents is saying that that is completely and utterly not the case. So, had a voice been in existence around, and this is not just a symbolic aspect. This is a practical aspect of health and mental health around intergenerational trauma that is felt, that is acknowledged, that is evidenced. But unfortunately, the politician, the alternative politician that might be implementing policies is denying that this is a reality, and that had a voice been there, that voice could not be ignored. In fact, it's not going to be ignored, but it's an absurd example of why we need the voice.
Thanks, Adam. We'll move on to you, Keshi. So, yeah, can you just give us a little bit of a background about how you ended up in this space? Rather than obviously I invited you all on this panel, that's why they're here. Just how you ended up in this space.
Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to start with an introduction to myself. My name is Keshi Moore. I'm a proud Bunjima woman from WA. I was born and raised in Broome, and my family, or my mum's side of my family, are from the Pilbara region of WA. I am a third year JD student at Melbourne Law School. I completed a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Knowledge and Law and Society at UWA before moving over here about 12 months ago to finish my JD studies here. I also just want to say thanks to Andrew and Swinburne for having me here tonight. Disclosure, I've never been on a panel before, so this is all very nerve-wracking for me. And what brought me here is I'm a part of NAM Law Students on Voice. We were a group of 4 law students, and we just felt that there was a lot of misinformation. And as law students, we get a lot of questions from friends and family, like you were saying, about what this voice is all about. And we're quite privileged because we've got the blessing of having a legal education, and I think that we have an obligation to use that and share that with people. So we came up with NAM Law Students on Voice, and it's a project that's culturally informed, Indigenous-led. It's neutral and it's fact-based, and that's our key principle that we abide by. And I just want to say that the importance of being actually a neutral project, while it's important to discuss the yes and no campaigns, is it's a marketing strategy, because we've been able to get in environments that usually wouldn't allow us because of the risk and because of the politics and surrounded it. But B, we've got Indigenous facilitators on board who have different views, who are voting yes, who are voting no, and have we really want to respect that and ensure that everyone feels invited to be involved in this discussion. And we've now trained over 60 facilitators. We've done over 50 workshops across Australia with staff and students at secondary schools. We've done faculties around the law school. We've done hospitals. We've done Slater and Gordon, which is a commercial law firm. Woo! But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And
this is Keshi's third talk fest today on this topic too, so she's a very busy girl. So we'll just start with the legal, I guess, side of it. Keshi is a law student. So what's the referendum going to actually do to the Constitution, and does it have a legislative effect on us?
just like a federal election on October 14th, we are going to go and vote at the polling places. What we are voting on is whether we want to insert a section into our constitution. This section is Chapter 9, Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples. And the voice is Section 129. This is at the back of the Constitution. And I don't think that change, if successful, I don't think change is going to happen overnight, but there will be obviously ongoing discussion and community engagement. After the voice, if the referendum is successful, I should say, legislation will need to be passed by both houses of parliament. And I actually think that it'll be a number of years before this is in full swing. Ultimately, the voice and what it's described to do is to make matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And you've discussed a couple of those, how I understand those to be things that impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, like housing, education, wellbeing, mental health, and the likes. And Tony McAvoy actually had a really important example, because he also talked about life expectancy that I wanted to mention. Tony McAvoy, who's a senior counsel barrister, he talks about the superannuation and how Indigenous people have a lower life expectancy than non-Indigenous people. And the consequences of this is that they often are working full time and they never actually get to retire because they pass away before they're able to retire. So I guess, a voice could potentially, if ultimately successful, would have the ability to open a dialogue with Parliament and Executive about how perhaps superannuation regulations may need to be altered to make changes for that.
So as we've heard, your family's from Broome in WA. Have you noticed any differences in the views to this referendum, say, in your experiences at Melbourne Uni, here in a big city, and in your community and people back in WA?
Yeah, if anyone's been to WA, it's a little bit more conservative than Victoria. I learnt what cancel culture and all that was when I moved over here. But it's actually been pretty difficult, this voice discussion, because I'm personally, without my law students on voice hat, take that off, I'm personally a reluctant yes. Reluctant because back home, my family, when you grow up in like a remote town or a community, you often, your views and your what you need, like your essential needs, are often neglected from Parliament and state government. And that's just not a black or white, Indigenous, not Indigenous issue. That's across the board. And so a lot of my family personally want to vote no because of it, because I feel like the voice isn't doing enough. It's not making substantial change on the ground for the communities. And also coming from like my mother's mother was like a member of the stolen generation, there's a huge distrust for the government and government policies as well. And that's been really challenging being here, because I'm obviously a law student and I have the benefit of my legal education and exposed to some incredible minds like Cheryl Saunders and Tim Goodwin and Dr. Eddie Cubillo, who have all helped me, develop a legal understanding of the referendum. And I think that a lot of people in Victoria and the people that are involved with our project, they just assume that everyone's voting yes, because it just seems like such an easy answer. Like, why wouldn't you want to vote in it? It's giving you a voice. But yeah, that's when you're from a remote community, and it's not, grass. Because another important aspect is empowering Indigenous people, because grassroots, we know, is always the most successful way to go, and it always leads to the most successful outcomes.
Thanks, Ketty. I'll pass over to Matt now to keep us moving along. So, excuse me, Matt, essentially, as many of us know, the voice is part of, it's emerged from the Uluru State from the Heart, and there were three key elements of that: voice, treaty, and truth. What's the link for you between this voice referendum and something like the treaty process that we're going through here in Victoria?
Look, my ancestral connections are from the Western District. I use that term, the Western District, because it's actually a state division and organisation of Indigenous populations. So it's Gunditjmara and Jabarong. But I've grown up in Watchabollock, which is Horsham, and Wathaurong country, which is Ballarat, and I studied my teaching degree in Wathaurong, Geelong, at the Institute of Koori Education. I was really fortunate enough at the age of 19, footloose and fancy free, and to be offered what we called a Koori intern teacher, primary school teacher, where I was sponsored by the local Aboriginal education consultancy group, the LACG, grassroots education organisation, and where I was able to work as a teacher's aide and study in a community-based delivery program, which allowed me to stay within my community. And, not uproot my whole life to go and study at a university, as I've shared with others, not live in that awful share house that we've all had to do in that university experience. Yeah. Upon graduation, went off and toured across Australia, worked throughout the Northern Territory in bush schools, as they were called back then. I'm sure the department in the NT would want to call them bush schools. But they were bush schools where I was schooled by the teachers' aides, the Aboriginal assistants, who told me what is and what isn't my role, and with that guidance, and then moved over into Queensland, where I worked across northern Queensland in Christian schools, still with working with Indigenous communities, Indigenous kids, working with Indigenous teacher educators. Come back down to Melbourne, where I was invited to go back and teach at the Institute of Koori Education at Deakin University, working towards the capability of increasing in more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers teaching in school, which is that Masidi project. I think I got that right. Yeah. And, so people who schooled me, I then went off and schooled others, which is, and I'm thinking about that amazing work of people like Professor Wendy Brabham, or Auntie Wendy Brabham, who actually schooled us and told us, told us, yeah. And then went over and worked within the Victoria University program, and then here at Swinburne. So on a little joint over at Latrobe, but we don't talk about that. So that's my story, and I guess that story is sort of the power of teacher ed, or the power of education, is absolutely amazing for opening doors and actually holding doors open for other people. And I was thinking about statistics, and the statistics get thrown around quite often when it comes to talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander societies. And, what are the kids who don't finish high school? Aboriginal boys are more likely to go to jail than they are to university. And then if we get through university, our life expectancies are pretty much comparative to non-Aboriginal people. So, that is the gift of these places here. But, the gift comes with a sense of generosity, and that generosity can be taken and moved around. And so, having those dialogues about treaty and truth-telling, in thinking through, I was talking to people, about the conversations that we're having in these institutions that are built on stolen land, fair point to make, that we're moving closer and closer trying to reckon that history, or reconcile that history with Indigenous knowledges and decolonising standpoints, yeah. So the conversations that we're having 10, 15, 20 years ago in these places are totally different to the conversations that we're having now. And the curriculum, especially in schools, because that's where one of the first places where the people who went before us, our professional ancestors, did that hard yards: education, health, law, justice, went into these places and worked at the coalface. And I'm reminded, someone said to me, really said, the higher you go, as an Aboriginal person, the higher you go up within the university, the more weathered your face becomes. And I'm thinking about those people that we know in those spaces, not looking at other people, Yeah. But, that's a hard yard. So, and that work has been done through a sense of truth telling. Yeah. And that truth telling requires a deep sort of dialogue, staying with the problem, staying with the tension, learning to unlearn. And, I want to talk about, moving over to that thing that we call a PhD thesis. I was interested, what does that truth telling look like in the teacher ed space, and what does caring for country look like inside this illegal clearing that we're doing, which was the name of the thesis. But so the truth telling is staying with the tension, learning to unlearn. So, and I think, in fact, they become that place before treaty making. Yeah, and I think about this work that we're doing here in the Victorian sense, and again, we're having conversations. I'm looking at you, John. Yeah, we're having those conversations today. That we're in the space of treaty making. Victoria's has got 2 treaties sort of on the table, and it's they're complicated things. Treaties, yeah. Queensland's even got a treaty. And did you hear my voice when I say even Queensland's got a treaty? So the treaty dialogue is taking place, and within that treaty space, there will be a shift in terms of moving from generosity. Look what we've given you, to what are our rights, responsibilities, and obligations under treaty partnership. So I think to sort of come back to that question about truth telling and treaty, this space here is the space of truth telling. It's requiring a sense of healing, deep listening. I think about that collective sigh when Rudd made the apology, the collective sigh, not just the Indigenous sigh to say, thank God we finally, we the end of gaslighting, yeah. But it was a collective sigh for non-Indigenous people too, who are wanting to come to the table and have the discussion, and to actually say, we understand and we know the history, we've stayed with the tension, and we're going to have a collective sort of conversation about this, even though we know that there will be ongoing work that needs to be done. And I think, this is a conversation, and I'm thinking about the burden that's been placed on Aboriginal people, and especially leading up to the referendum. And it is the burden that Aboriginal folk in the university have. We're 1% of the population, not even, in the university, but we're expected to sort of carry the load across with the other 99%. So, and I'm thinking about the pain that's actually taking place across the university, across the country, where we're having to log a set of claims to demonstrate that repatriations are deserved. And I find it similar to the equal marriage debate. And I was having conversations again with my boss this afternoon about Magda Sabansky and that personal pain, the personal narrative that she had to share with the nation to get people to walk with her in that story. So I'm mindful that, and I was actually very reluctant, Andrew knows this, I was very reluctant to come today and talk through this because of the dialogue, the pain, having to log the pain, having to sit through and watch the lateral and the vertical violence that's being played out, the stuff that we have to listen to and attend to. So I guess, in the big picture of things, I'm like, I want to say Keshi. Hey, I got it right that time. Excellent. I'm a reluctant yes. I would prefer that there are other things on the table. I accept that those aren't on the table at this point. I'm thinking that from that song, From Little Things, Big Things Grow, where Vincent Lingari says, we're not talking about money. We know how to wait. And I thought this was my reluctant no was a yes. My reluctant yes was also a no by saying, no, well, look, we're 65,000 years old. We know how to wait. But I think, though, maybe we can't wait. And we've got to accept what's on the table, knowing that it's not going to be the magic solution, that's going to fix all of the ills. We know that treaties around the world don't fix everything, but we know voice doesn't fix everything. But we know that truth-telling brings us to a space of deep listening, a deeper respect for one another. I think, that models the work Indigenous folk within the university we're doing. We're staying, we're bringing people to the discussion. We're trying to lead people away from the violence of settler colonialism, trying to bring them into the light of the gift of Indigenous epistemology. Whether the voice does that, whether the treaty does that, I think truth-telling will do that.
I think it's really important to understand the role of education in all of this. And from my point of view, it's the lack of education about what a referendum is for a start. For a lot of Australians, they haven't seen one before. And then we add the complexity of what this issue is all about, that it is a really difficult one, and education really is the key. So thanks for that, Matt. So Ian, I'll now pass on. If you just give us a little bit of a background as to...
I'm Ian Ham. I'm a Yorta Yorta man. That's it. Just a little bit more. Google it, mate, and you'll see. No, I was involved in government for over 30 years and did stuff that brought great change to Victoria. That'll do. And I do other stuff now. I left government and I do other stuff now. Google me and you'll work out the rest of it. That sounds awfully blowing smoke up my own arse, but, Google me. You'll work it out.
Thanks, Ian. On that, I guess I wanted to mention too that we didn't want to make this panel a campaign at all for yes or no, but I think it's important to hear our stories because then you understand where we're coming from and why we think the way that we do. We might at the end talk about what we personally think or how we might vote ourselves, but that's kind of irrelevant to what we want to discuss here. But Ian, why, in your vast experience too, particularly with governments, why are you seeing particularly this referendum as such a massive issue? Why is there such opposition, do you think, to this referendum?
I think one of the issues with it, and you hit a point before, the last referendum was 25 years ago. All right, next year it's 25 years ago. There are many people voting this time who have never voted in a referendum. There are those who voted in that referendum who forgot what referendums are about. It's simple as that. Referendums are difficult things, and I think one of them is people are confusing what this is with a normal electoral campaign, a normal electoral cycle. That's one of the issues. Why is there so much noise? Because people have gone to their spaces, both the yes and the no campaign, of not actually understanding what this is. I think that's part of the problem. The no campaign, their job is to ensure the yes campaign doesn't win. And so they're throwing up everything they can. The yes campaign, I think, is trying to throw everything at it, including the kitchen sink, and all that's doing is clouding what the real issue is. Underneath, once you pull everything back, what is the fundamental issue? So if I can talk about that for a minute, cut straight to that. If I look at you as a room full of voters, you've heard three really good things about us as Aboriginal people, or three of us, and Adam's view of what it is from the Aboriginal perspective and what Swinburne's doing. Has anybody spoken to you about you? What's your job in this? Where are you in this? This isn't about just the 3% of the population who are Aboriginal. This is about the other 97% who aren't. So quickly, if I strip away what this isn't, it's not, I've got a list. It's not, just bear with me while I get it out. It's a good list too. Okay. It's not about the Uluru Statement. This is not about the Uluru Statement. It's not about, and this is going to fly in the face of everything you've probably heard. This referendum is not about the Uluru Statement. It's not about sovereignty and they're not ceding of it. It's not about black advocacy. It's not about parliamentary chambers. It's not about the High Court and litigation. It's not about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It's not about conferring the rights above other Australians. It's not about who can speak to whom and about what. It is not about who members of Parliament do or do not represent. That's been a bit of a thing, hasn't it? It's not about the finer points of the Australian Constitution. So it's just park the Constitution over there. It's not about representative structures. It is not about detail. Anybody of you think it's about detail? God, it is not about detail. Why? There isn't any. It's not about costs and budget. It's not about, whoever mentioned it, it's not about Alice Springs. It's so not about Alice Springs. And my catch-all for everything else that it's not about, it is not about unlimited rice pudding, etc., etc., etc. So if I take all that out, what is it about? This referendum is about who we are as a country, who we are as a nation. That's what this referendum is about. It's about what you want this country to be. It's about who we think we are. It's about who we really are. If I use the 67 referendum as a starting point for this, really quickly, 1967, we went to the polls to amend two parts of the Constitution. The first one, the Parliament shall have the powers, you might know this better than I do, but essentially it was, there is a bit in the Constitution that says Parliament from time to time, will undertake a reckoning of the population, brackets, except for the Aborigines. There was another part that says Parliament shall have the power to make laws in regard of the race of peoples, bracket, except for the Aborigines. Basically, we weren't counted in the population, in the census, and the Commonwealth Parliament couldn't make any laws about us. 1901, we were seen as a problem for the states, not a responsibility, but a problem for the states. They could deal with this. Get to 1967, the world's moved on. There's obviously the Aboriginal rights movement throughout the 20th century, and then that got heightened by the American civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, etc., in the late 50s, early 60s. Even Australia couldn't ignore that, where we go to this poll about these two things. But they weren't the real questions. You think about the history of Aboriginal Australia and non-Aboriginal Australia to that point. We'd been dispossessed, dislocated, just dissed full stop. Our children were stolen and still being stolen. I know about the stolen children. I am one of them. And we were also, there was still this question, there's still even this debate, are the Aborigines a dying race? That was actually a real live thing in May 1967. So when we went to the polls to answer those two questions, there were a couple of deeper questions that every Australian had to ask themselves. And they were these. Do the Aborigines belong in this country? Are the Aborigines part of the future of this nation? They were the real questions Australia had to ask itself, and every Australian had to ask themselves in May 1967. And the answer came back to those, yes. Over 90% of the population, yes, the Aborigines do belong in this nation, in this country, and all 6 states, because Andrew said we need to have the majority of states, all 6 states said, yes, they are part of the future of this country. So what does that mean now? So the Constitution amended, we get counted in the census, and the Commonwealth can make laws about us. Hooray! Kinda, sorta. So the Commonwealth made lots of laws, lots and lots and lots of laws, and lots of policies and lots of programs, and not always getting it right. In fact, sometimes getting it wrong. So you had some who were really good, some which were really rubbish, most of it in between. But what has been consistent is the inconsistency which they have spoken to us. And not only the Commonwealth Parliament, but lots of Australians in lots of settings. So what does that mean? It means we've got to a point now where this referendum is about a fundamental issue, again, who we are as Australian people. What does our nation believe about itself? And this is the decision you have to make when you vote. If in 67 we said, yes, the Aborigines belong in this country, and I use the term Aborigines because the level of debate and discussion, I'm sometimes not sure if it's 2023 or if it's 1963. So if anybody's hankering for the old days, the Aborigines. If in 1967 we said the Aborigines belong in this country, the question before us now is, should the Aborigines be able to speak? If in 67 we said they are part of the future of this nation, the question is, do we as a nation, and this is the bit for you, do I as a voter allow the Aborigines to talk about things that are about them? Yes or no? That is quite simply what is at the heart of this, Andrew. I think there has been too much noise and fluff from the Yes campaign about things that have clouded it. The No campaign has done what it was going to do anyway. Don't let it get to the core of what it is. Throw everything you can up in the air to cloud it, to smoke it, everything, to stop people getting to that core. That's all you have to think about. Should the Aborigines be able to speak? Should I, as a voter, allow them to talk? That's what this is about at its very core. So when you go and vote, yes or no, depending on what you do. And I'm honest, I am a yes person, but more importantly, you need to know what the decision is you make that you can live with, because that's the other thing with this, which people don't think about. You asked about what happens if it's a no. More importantly, 15 November, every Australian will get out of bed, go to the bathroom, at some stage look at themselves in the mirror. You have to be able to look at yourself, and regardless of the outcome of the referendum, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and live with the way you voted. Whether you voted yes or no, it has to come from here, because this isn't something as a lightweight as I don't know, fringe benefits tax, or what was that thing Bill Shorten went down on tax credits on your shares or something, whatever that was. It's not about it. Yeah. It's not about environmental regulation. That's not lightweight, by the way. But something else that's lightweight. This is a fundamental core issue that you are deciding on part of the Australian population. Matt and Keisha spoke about how the weight that this is. I've been asked about this. For the second time in my life, my countrymen are sitting in judgment of my worth as a human being, my value as a human, as a person. Do I belong in this country? That happened to me when I was 3 years old. And now, should I be able to speak? That's incomprehensible for most people to even consider. So this isn't a lightweight decision that every Australian has to make. It's probably the most deepest decision this generation of Australians is going to have to make, because there weren't too many around who voted in 67 who are going to be voting this time. This generation of Australians are going to have to make a decision that will, and to quote Michelle Obama, she said of the US presidency, the US presidency doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. This referendum won't change this country. It will reveal this country. It will reveal who we are. It won't change who we are. It will reveal who we are. That's what this is all about. And I think that those kind of things is what we've not been able to get to the core of. This is about you. This isn't about me or Keisha or Matt. It is a bit, but it's mostly about you.
Thanks, Ian. I want to make it clear where we're coming from, and hopefully that's been clear. I just also wanted to point out this is being recorded, so we might have to edit the bit out where Matt talked about the pressure we're under at the university, particularly we're in the middle of EBA bargaining. I want to keep my job, man. I am joking.
Thanks very much, David Painter. I'd like to ask a question, and I'm not sure if the panel here tonight have the answer, but one of the key objections by the No campaign is that the voice is the first step and the next step will be the treaty with the country. I guess I'm very curious from a constitutional standpoint, a constitutional law standpoint, whether or not a discussion on treaty with the federal government is a potential future outcome, or if that remains a discussion with the states going forward.
Thanks for your question and thanks for coming. From my understanding, the voice doesn't rule out a treaty coming in the future. And something really important to know about treaties is that they take years to create, years of discussions, years of negotiations. So I know that there's an argument that treaty should come first, but if we're being realistic, I'm just not sure how that works. And I've just got another point, but I've forgotten. Come back.
In short answer, no. This is simply about one thing. It is about the voice being put in the Constitution. It does not rule in treaty. It does not rule out treaty. That is a thing for another time that we might get to, we might not get to. Practically, as you've pointed out, if you're going to have a treaty, you've got to have somebody to talk to have a treaty with. So having a voice kind of gets you someone to talk to have a treaty. That's been the mystery part for me is, okay, if we don't have anyone to talk to, how do we have a treaty? We're doing that in Victoria. That's the thing is people in Victoria, yeah, it's Victoria. We have a First Peoples Assembly, which has laid the groundwork for now doing a treaty. You've got to have that as a starting point. But this referendum doesn't necessarily lead one way or the other. It is a single step in its own right. Its first step is to let us speak. That's the first and only thing this is about, is the first and only thing it will do. People throwing that up, of course they want to throw it up because they want people to be fearful. So you chuck on all this other stuff that is meant to be diversionary. And in that, it's doing its work.
I guess I'm sort of questioning, if you already have a Victorian treaty and a Queensland treaty, can you then override that with a national treaty, or does it sort of prevent that from happening?
Okay, so, well, no, it doesn't, but it kind of becomes, the necessity of a national treaty recedes into the background because we are a very localised people. We are Kimberley, north of the Murray River, Western Victoria, we're a very regional, localised people. This is where treaties will be done in substance. The best you're kind of going to find with a national thing, if it's still relevant at some stage, will be that it might have a set of national standards that are really basic principles that all treaties must be elevated to. So you might pick your highest point treaty and say all others must come up to this as a set of basic national standards. We've actually got the same thing in Victoria now, the Victorian Traditional Owner Act. It's called the No Disadvantage Test. So as each Traditional Owner Settlement Agreement is done around the state of Victoria, each one is better than the one before it. When we wrote the Act, and I know because I was there, we wrote a clause in that no group should be disadvantaged by signing an agreement at their point in time. So the one who went first obviously was here. The one who went second was here, third and so forth. Every time a TO group, a Traditional Owner Settlement Agreement is signed, all the others are reviewed to make sure that they are lifted up to what that latest one is. So they are not disadvantaged. You could potentially have that with a treaty framework or treaty set of principles at a Commonwealth level that all the state ones and all the regional ones have to come up to. But again, it may be that the Commonwealth just becomes irrelevant to the conversation because the states and territories are leaping ahead.
I'll just add to that too that in 1992 we had the Mabo decision, and I remember I was only a young fella then, but I remember very clearly being told that I was taking backyards off people and they were going to lose their houses and the whole structure of the country and fabric of society was going to change, and none of that happened. We've got a constitution and a parliament system in place that's set up to protect what we have at the moment. We're just trying to negotiate a relevant piece of what was taken for Aboriginal people, which doesn't include taking things off private citizens. So again, as Ian said before, the substance of the fear in the No campaign is what personally really concerns me, because a lot of it's based on things that just aren't true, misinformation.
Hi, it must be this row, but it can pass somewhere else afterwards. So yeah, Juliana Evans. I guess what I'm concerned about, just in terms of a voice, so we might have spoken already about what's happening in Victoria, what's happening in Queensland. Actually, in some places like this, in the territories, so Northern Territory specifically, if there isn't a voice, there's actually nothing, because they're reliant on the federal government, and that's, I must admit, for me, I'm really concerned about how can we have a voice, and particularly for certain persons from Alice Springs, that's actually being sort of denied in a way, and that kind of feels wrong. So how, I think there's opportunities that can be done in Victoria, and we're seeing in New South Wales that they're looking at things that can be done if the voice doesn't get up and if it's not a yes, and in Queensland, but where it really, really matters, somewhere like the Northern Territory, what are the options there? And that's what I've not heard, and I'm really concerned about.
Well, one of the things is that at a fundamental level, this voice allows Aboriginal people to come up with solutions that are locally based. So I would hope that we can find a solution so that there is a voice for those people that's different to the one we've got here in Victoria. It's certainly different to the system that we've got at the moment. One of the arguments for the No campaign is that Aboriginal people have a say in Parliament already. But the say that we're having there, that the few voices that we've got in there as Aboriginal people are tied to a political party, and the ones that get change are the loudest and the ones who are most affiliated to those party lines. They're not the voices of the local communities that we need to hear. And we hope that this voice gives us that opportunity at a local level rather than simply feed into the existing political system that essentially has excluded us for 100.
They're Aboriginal, but they're not Aboriginal representatives. They are of their seats, their state. They bring their Aboriginality and what they know to the discussion on Aboriginal issues, but they were not elected by an Aboriginal constituency. So any notion that we have representation of Aboriginal people in Parliament is a complete furphy. It's non-existent. In terms of alternatives, well, that really goes back to state jurisdiction, I suppose, what states or territories want to do. If this doesn't get up, it's actually, again, going back to that fundamental question. And this is what it would be saying to the people in the Territory. The Northern Territory has not moved, considering 1/3 of its population is Aboriginal, and it hasn't moved to any way of deeply engaging with the Aboriginal community, who routinely are kind of treated appallingly by the system up there. If this referendum fails, what does it really say? I mean, it's basically saying to us as people, you can dance for us, you can welcome us to country at your sporting events, you can paint pictures that we can hang in our homes, but you must not speak. You must remain silent and subservient, and you will have no say in decisions being made about you. So in places like the Northern Territory, I don't see an alternative. Perhaps progressive states like Victoria and other states will do show by example, but that's really what is at stake here with this. And which goes to a more fundamental question: why the Constitution? Why don't we just legislate it? Well, because legislation can come and go. There's a few examples of that, but why the Constitution? This is actually the most difficult question of all, because this is really about cutting to the core of who we are as a country. That question is this: do we as a nation, as the Australian people, as expressed through our Commonwealth Parliament and our Commonwealth Government, do we really trust ourselves not to screw the Aborigines over again? I think we all know the truth, the answer to that one, truthfully. That's why this needs to be in the Constitution. What it looks like will be Parliament will determine, but even if they have the really small end voice, there will still be a single person, a single voice speaking for us all. That's coming from ordinary Aboriginal people about how we see the world and where we think it should go for us.
Reconciliation Australia and the state reconciliation bodies have talked about a no and what that means. So for communities, I'm on the board of an organisation in Gallywinku, and there's been a lot of conversation around how, voice, what do we do if there's a no? I think a lot of the state reconciliation bodies and Reconciliation Australia want to identify successful models of a voice, something like Murdy Parky Regional Assembly in Western New South Wales, the First Peoples Assembly here in Victoria, and showcase success and through the RAP community, which includes governments, local governments, includes state and federal and territory governments as well, that have a reconciliation action plan to really influence and to model the best, the intent of the voice as it is now, that it's democratic, that it's local, that it's regional, and that there is a connection. So it will take longer, and it won't be as efficient as an enshrined voice in the Constitution. But I remain hopeful that the intent will. I'm not saying this to say we should be ambivalent about a yes or a no. A yes will be much faster, much more efficient, and for Ian's points, much more substantial around the value and the belonging and the hope that we as Australians have for each other and the connections. That's really what's at stake. I agree with Ian completely, but yeah, I think that's a really important. It's not a scorched earth. There will be other avenues, and the reconciliation community and others will make sure that happens. Yeah.
I want to say that the Constitution is for principles, not policy. And there is nothing to say that concessions and priorities will not be given to communities such as the Northern Territory and other remote Aboriginal communities. And that's coming back to your point about clouding the question. We're just here to vote on whether you think that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want a voice. There's no such thing as we're not putting Northern Territory at a disadvantage. And I'm sure that if a voice is successful, that conversations will be had about what priorities need to be given to communities such as those.
The strength of land councils, in the Territory, in New South Wales, etc. The strength of land councils in, first of all, advocating for the return of land already happened. We see this on the Indigenous map of Australia in terms of land council and land management, land water, the advocacy of caring for country. So I don't want to say, yes or no. That strength of land council has been built up, grassroots, strong base already, within the Territory dialogue. So yes or no, land councils will still remain hopefully strong, advocating grassroots strength. That's it.
So I think we'll leave it there. We've got a few refreshments out the front. So if you've got any particular questions for the panelists, please come up and ask them before they run away, because they love being accosted. We've just got some gifts here for each of the panelists. And just in closing too, I'd like to sort of reiterate what Ian said before too, that this is a constitutional amendment. As Australians, as citizens, if we don't know what that means, it's incumbent upon us to find out. What does that mean for me? We've just told you from a probably slightly biased Indigenous perspective what we think about this issue, and it should be fairly obvious, how we all feel about it. But it's important that all Australians understand what they're voting for and why. And as Ian said before, I'm really passionate about people voting with your convictions. Stay true to yourself. As Ian said, and I really like that comment from Michelle Obama, we're going to reveal ourselves as a nation shortly. We're the only former British colony without a treaty with its native people. So therefore, this becomes really important for us as Aboriginal people. It becomes really important for us as a nation on the international stage. So I really think it's important that all of us vote with our convictions, vote with your heart, vote the way that you wake up on the 15th of October and you're going to be happy with your decision. So could you please just join me in thanking the panel? Thanks very much, Matt, Adam, Ian and Keshi.